Alonzo L Burgess, 29 years on death row. He was charged with the murders of his girlfriend Sheila Nodimol, who was 31 years old, and her two daughters, Latoria Long, 14 years old, and Alexis Nodimol, 8 years old. There was proof that he used the carjack's portion to beat the victims. Burgess is now 57 years old. Michael Karut, 20 years on death row. He was convicted along with another man for the murder of 12-year-old Brett Boyer. They shot him 3 times in the head and they cut his father's throat, then buried the man in a shallow grave from which he managed to dig himself out and call for help. Forrest Boyer dragged himself to a nearby road and insisted his kid was treated first, even if the cut he had was year to year. The two criminals had posed as police officers, and this was all an attempt to rob the victim. This was not the only conviction they got, however. They were also charged with murdering Thurman Ray Ratliff, 68 years old, and Catherine Combs Ratliff, 62 years old. Karut is now 65 years old. Jimmy Lee Brooks, 19 years on death row. Brooks was the second man involved in the murder of 12-year-old Brett Boyer along with Karut Michael. His lawyers argue that he does not deserve to die because he did not plan on ending the life of the little boy and because he is showing remorse. Brooks is now 44 years old. James Ben Brownfield, 19 years on death row. He was convicted for the murder of his sister, Brenda McCutcheon, her husband, Latham McCutcheon, and his sister's 3-year-old grandson, Joshua Hodges. Brownfield consumed Xanax pills on December 23, 2001, became enraged with his sister over drugs and money, then killed her and Joshua with a claw hammer. Brenda McCutcheon suffered approximately 20 blows to the head and other injuries to her body. Joshua suffered approximately 16 blows to the head and, of course, other injuries to his body as well. They both died from multiple blunt force injuries. Brownfield traveled across town to her estranged husband's house after killing Brenda and Joshua, pretending it was a friendly visit to obtain entry, and then struck him with his fists and the hammer. Latham McCutcheon received 10 powerful hits to the skull from the claw hammer, among other injuries. Then Brownfield used a knife to slit his throat and stab him in the heart. He is now 49 years old. Wesley Devon Harris, 18 years on death row. Harris terrorized and murdered his girlfriend's grandmother, parents, and 3 teenage brothers. 65-year-old Mila Ruth Bole was the matriarch of a family that resided on a farm near Moody's Crossroad, Crenshaw County. Joanne, her 35-year-old daughter, and Willie Haslip, 40-year-old, shared a trailer on the family farm where they raised their 3 kids, Jerry Bole, 19 years old, Tony Bole, 17 years old, and Joni Bole, 14 years old. Janice Bole, a 16-year-old daughter of Joanne and Willie, shared the farmhouse with her grandmother, Mila. When Janice first met Harris, he was 19 years old and she was just 14. Janice fell pregnant 3 months after the two first met, and they had a daughter, Nashay, whom they called Shay. According to Janice's testimony, she barely saw Harris after telling him she was pregnant until Shay was born. Then, she and Harris shared a trailer in Laverne. Janice claimed that Harris turned aggressive, at which point she returned to the farm and lived with her grandmother. After a fight with the entire family, Harris decided to murder everyone except Janice and Shay, and that's exactly what he did. He shot them all, one by one, starting with the grandmother and continuing with the brothers and parents. He then took Janice and his daughter, as well as the family dog, to a 3-day trip in which they visited multiple friends of his. Eventually, Harris's aunt persuaded him to turn himself over to the authorities. While her entire family was being murdered, Janice was threatened by the father of her child to stay quiet and not warn anybody because if she did, he would shoot her as well. I cannot imagine the terror and heartbreak she had to go through. This was absolutely horrible. Harris is now 43 years old. Jeremy Brian Jones, 18 years on death row. He was found guilty of capital murder in the 2004 rape and gunshot death of Lisa Maureen Nichols, 44 years old. In Georgia, Jones is accused of killing Amanda Greenwell, 16 years old, in Douglasville. He is allegedly a suspect in the disappearance of Patrice Enders, a hairdresser from Forsyth County. According to investigators, he may be involved in another 10 murders. Jones assured the judge that God would have the last say before the punishment was read. Jones had severe mental and emotional difficulties, according to his defense counsel, including a long-term drug addiction that ought to be considered a mitigating circumstance. He is now 50 years old. Kenneth Eugene Billups, 17 years on death row. 24 years old Stephen Lockett was fatally shot by Kenneth Billups, and 3 days later, Billups also killed Rafael Salcedo, 15 years old, Enrique Marquez, 16 years old, Wilbur Gomez, 20 years old, and Manuel Perez Nunez, 27 years old. He pretended to be a drug dealer in order to get the 4 victims to a Center Point condominium on December 16, 2003. When they arrived, he killed all 4. Billups is now 50 years old. William Bruce Marshall, 17 years on death row. The Vestavia Hills Police Department received a call from Tonya Bentley on December 28, 2004, informing them that her daughter Alicia was missing from their residence. Marshall and Tonya Bentley had split up in the beginning of December 2004. From the apartment they had occupied with Marshall, Tonya, Alicia, and Tonya's infant boy had relocated to an apartment in a separate building. On the evening of December 29th, the day after Alicia went missing and while being questioned by the FBI, Marshall acknowledged that he had done a terrible thing. According to Marshall, Alicia and him got into a verbal altercation that had turned violent, and he had punched her in the head with his hand. He explained that he had brought her out in the country and left her there, but he was unsure if she was okay. Marshall traveled outside of Columbiana in a vehicle with law enforcement officers. He was finally able to direct authorities to Alicia's body after scouring off many side roads. Except for a pair of white socks, she was naked. The body's examination confirmed that Alicia had been killed by strangulation. Marshall is now 59 years old. Donald Broadnax, 26 years on death row. Donald Broadnax, who had been found guilty of murder in 1978 and was presently serving a 99-year prison term, lived in a work release facility in Alexander City and worked at Welborn Forest Products there in April 1996. Broadnax married Jan Stamps in 1995. She was the grandmother of D'Angelo Stamps, who was then 3 years old. Broadnax and Jan were experiencing marital issues, and he thought Jan was primarily to blame for a recent parole denial. According to the evidence, Jan and D'Angelo delivered lunch to Broadnax at his employment on April 25, 1996, after 6 p.m. Broadnax's co-worker at Welborn and prisoner at the work release facility, Johnny Baker, testified in court that he saw Broadnax driving Jan's car. Later that night, a couple reported a suspicious vehicle parked across the street to their house. At around 9 p.m., Birmingham Police Department officers who had responded to the call arrived at the house. They saw blood on the ground behind the parked car and on the bumper as they got closer. They promptly radioed their supervisor and the paramedics based on their observations. Then they secured the site. The automobile belonged to Jan Broadnax. When the paramedics arrived, they unlocked the trunk and discovered Jan and D'Angelo's remains inside. They had each suffered injuries. Jan and D'Angelo died from blunt force trauma, which may have been brought on by using a piece of lumber like the one discovered in the trunk with the bodies, according to Dr. Robert Brissy, the forensic pathologist who conducted the examinations on the victims. Broadnax is now 61 years old. Michael Craig Maxwell, 25 years on death row. Harold Pugh and Joey Pugh, his 11-year-old son, were reported missing to the Colbert County Sheriff's Office on July 21, 1997. A friend of the Pughs named Mike Sennett stated that he and other friends went searching for the Pughs at Cane Creek in Colbert County early on July 21st after learning of their disappearance. The Pughs were being looked for in the same region by both the local authorities and the rescue team. Sennett stated that both Harold and his son liked to fish. Sennett was the one who discovered Harold and Joey Pugh's bodies floating in the creek while making one final trip up Cane Creek in his boat before returning home. The next day's autopsies showed that each victim had received 2 headshots. 2 armed men who were dressed in dark-colored army fatigues, hooded shirts, sunglasses, and gloves robbed the Deposit Guarantee National Bank in Belmont, Mississippi on the day the victims' bodies were discovered. A bank employee testified that while he was unable to identify the man responsible for the robbery, he was able to identify the truck they fled in. The police located the truck because it was set on fire and they were led to it by the smoke. A suspect was arrested and he explained what happened. His name was Ferguson and he admitted to the police that on the day of the killings, he and the other criminals were searching for 2 vehicles to take and use in the bank robbery in Belmont. Ferguson claimed that while they were searching for a vehicle to take, Moore, Maxwell, Graham, and Risley came across the Pugh's truck parked close to the Cane Creek boat launch. According to Ferguson, Harold Pugh climbed out of the boat and into his truck when the Pugh family arrived at the landing in their boat. He claimed that Maxwell was directing the Pughs to get back into the boat while pointing a gun at them before he even realized it. Maxwell and Moore leaped into the boat before Moore gave the command for Ferguson to follow. Ferguson claimed that both Moore and Maxwell were carrying pistols. Ferguson said that he was not carrying any type of weapon. They continued downstream in the boat with the victims while Risley and Graham waited with the truck. After hearing a shot, Ferguson turned and he saw Maxwell shooting Harold Pugh. He insisted that he had no idea who shot Joey Pugh, but he did admit that Maxwell and Moore were responsible for tossing the bodies of the victims into the creek. Maxwell is now 52 years old. Thomas Dale Ferguson, 25 years on death row. We talked about him earlier in connection to Harold Pugh and Joey Pugh, his 11-year-old son deaths caused by 4 men, among which Ferguson was. He is now 50 years old. John Michael Ward, 24 years on death row. Michelle Milner Ward called the Baldwin County 911 Center at 7:28 a.m. on April 22, 1997, to report that her infant was not breathing. The Ward's travel trailer home was reached by paramedics 10 minutes later. While en route to the South Baldwin Regional Medical Center, the paramedics tried to revive Nicholas Ward via intubation after receiving his body from John Michael Ward. Dr. Robert Revel, the emergency room's attending physician, examined the child and found that he had rigor mortis, he was cold to the touch, he was not breathing, and had no pulse. When he arrived, the doctor declared the infant dead. Dr. Revel noted the absence of vital signs, abrasions on Nicholas's scalp, nose, and mouth region, pus-like material in his eyes, blood in his ears, bruises on his neck and chest, feces in the diaper, a deformity on his right arm, and crusty material in certain nail beds. Dr. Revel spoke with both parents following the assessment. The baby developed breathing issues, according to Nicholas's father, who claimed that a folding chair had fallen from a shelf and hit him in the head. The father did not believe it was necessary to call 911, despite the mother's desire to seek medical assistance. During the performance of the final rites, the mother seemed distressed, but Ward was impassive. According to Michelle's testimony, when they first started dating, Ward put his hand over her mouth and threatened to suffocate her. Throughout their marriage, Ward beat his wife violently. In the early hours of April 22, 1997, Ward suffocated to death his 4-month-old son after causing him multiple wounds. Ward is now 59 years old. Please remember to hit that subscribe button if you like my channel. Thank you. Willie Earl Scott, 21 years on death row. At 19 years old, Willie Earl Scott resided with his grandmother. The home was also occupied by 10-year-old Latonia Sager, her younger sister, and their mother, Latrice Sager. There also resided Latrice's brother Albert, his partner Shanika Scott, and their 2 kids. Scott and Shanika were cousins. When Scott's grandmother awoke during the night of September 11, 1999, she witnessed Willie Scott leaving the house in a Lexus car that had been parked outside. Albert was looking for a broom downstairs the following morning. He was instructed by Latrice to check Latonia's chamber. Latonia's chamber door was locked, and when Albert pounded on it, she did not respond. Latrice and Albert entered the room when Albert unlocked the door. Latonia was partially covered by a sheet and appeared to be sleeping on her stomach. When Latonia's foot was touched by Latrice, she felt the coldness. Latonia was gone. After that, Latrice discovered that both her rifle and the Lexus were missing from their respective locations in her bedroom and driveway. Scott went on to essay another girl multiple times before she was able to escape and call the police. He is now 43 years old. Michael Wayne Reynolds, 16 years on death row. At the Martins' home on Tidmore Bend Road on May 25, 2003, Chuck Martin, 38 years old, his wife Melinda, 31 years old, and their 8-year-old daughter Savannah were all murdered. Reynolds was found guilty of their deaths. He reportedly visited the Martin residence to obtain cash. Chuck Martin, who suffered 11 stabbed wounds, was involved in a struggle in the kitchen, according to forensic findings. Melinda Martin resisted with her attacker before being stabbed 24 times in the bedroom, according to the forensics. Savannah Martin was stabbed 5 times because she was in the room when the murders took place, and Reynolds did not want to risk being identified. He is now 51 years old. Kevin Andre Tols, 14 years on death row. After brutally abusing a 5-year-old boy, Kevin Andre Tols was found guilty of abandoning him and allowing his injuries to cause his death. Shalinda Glass, Tols' girlfriend, reported her automobile as stolen in Albertville in December 2006, while the little boy, Jonte, was inside. Days later, Tols was taken into custody. The plan to cover up the boys' murder turned out to involve the stolen car. In the trunk of the car, recovered at a house Tols owned, was where his body was discovered. The youngster had been severely beaten, according to an autopsy, and had the injuries received medical attention, he could still be alive today. Due to a behavior grade from school that showed a straight-mouthed rather than a smiling countenance on a report card, Tols beat the child. The jury recommended execution after Tols was found guilty in December 2009. He is now 49 years old. Timothy Scott Boyle, 13 years on death row. After being found guilty of killing Savannah White, his girlfriend's 2-year-old daughter, in 2005, he received the death penalty. Savannah White was lying in a coma on the early morning of her 2nd birthday. Assistant District Attorney Carol Griffith testified during the Gaston trial in 2009. She was unable to hear anyone wishing her a good birthday. The child's skull was not broken, despite the fact that she had been badly hit and pummeled in the head. The autopsy was performed by a forensic pathologist who testified that Savannah had bruises on her face, shoulders, and legs in addition to burns from cigarettes. Savannah's sister also gave a testimony claiming to have seen Boyle torture and burn her sister just before she passed away. The sister also had scars from what she claimed were burns caused by Boyle's cigarettes. He is now 40 years old. Ronnie Lynn Kirkey, 13 years on death row. In 2010, Ronnie Lynn Kirkey received a death sentence after being found guilty of murdering Cornell Norwood, the 23-month-old son of his girlfriend. The child's mother, Yolanda Norris, discovered her kid on the floor in a pool of blood, according to Deputy District Attorney Carol Griffith, who testified before the jury. According to Terry Ferris, a former Gadsden police investigator, Kirkey admitted to detectives that he had put a foot on Cornell and was standing directly on top of him. At the trial, however, he said that he just fell on the child. He is now 48 years old. Ryan Gerald Russell, 13 years on death row. Russell was given the death penalty by Shelby County Circuit Judge Michael Joyner for the 2008 murder of his ward and cousin, Catherine Helen Gillespie, who was 11 years old. According to Joyner, the punishment met the requirement for the death penalty under the aggravating factors of being terrible, appalling, and cruel. According to the trial evidence, Russell shot the girl in the back of the head in the house they shared on Carey Downs Road in the vicinity of Inverness. Russell shot her and then put her body in a plastic trash can that he put in the back of his SUV that was parked in the garage. Russell and Catherine Gillespie's relative, Tim Gillespie, praised Joyner's judgment as a just sentence and expressed his wish that it would be executed sooner rather than later. Before being given a sentence, Russell, who was dressed in an orange gel jumpsuit, was given the opportunity to speak, but he declined. He is now 50 years old. Michael Bragg Wolf, 12 years on death row. Wolf admitted to shooting his wife and 2-year-old son while making a 911 call. That evening, a guy reportedly told an emergency operator, "I just killed 2 people. My family. I need to go to jail." In the courtroom of Mobile County Circuit Judge Joseph Johnston, a jury listened to a recording of that call. He killed their 2-year-old son Aiden and 30-year-old wife Angel Wolf. Towards the end of the evening on March 5, 2008, the mother and son's bodies were discovered in a trailer of Schillinger Road. According to the prosecution, Michael Wolf became fixated on whether the toddler was really his own son and killed the 2 people on purpose. Wolf was obsessed on the question of whether Aiden was really his son after learning that his wife could have had an affair, according to Mobile County Assistant District Attorney Joe Beth Murphy. He was the boy's father with greater than 99% certainty, according to a paternity test. However, the defense claimed that Wolf accidentally shot his son before shooting his wife when he became angry of what had happened. He is now 45 years old. Jesse Lee Phillips, 11 years on death row. In 2009, Phillips fatally shot his wife, Erica Rose Phillips, and their unborn child in Marshall County. He was found guilty of capital murder and given the death penalty. It was the first case to be prosecuted and found guilty under Alabama's Brody Act, which classified killing an unborn child in an attack on the mother as homicide. On February 27, 2009, the shooting took place at an Alabama 69 car wash near Guntersville. After shooting his wife in the back of the head, Jesse Phillips left her body lying in a car wash bay. The next day, the 23-year-old passed away in a nearby hospital. According to court records, Phillips admitted to shooting the woman. He is now 44 years old. Dante Callan, 10 years on death row. Callan was found guilty of capital murder in the stabbing deaths of his great-aunt Bernice Kelly, 59 years old, and his cousins Cortez Kelly, 33 years old, and Delia Burgess, 12 years old, on October 29, 2010, and in the subsequent starting of fires in that flat. Callan was condemned to death in 2013. According to a court document, Bernice Kelly sustained 18 stab wounds, Cortez Kelly sustained 23 stab wounds, and Delia sustained 34 stab wounds. After the killings, Callan, who was 18 at the time, admitted his guilt to Birmingham police. In a bedroom within his aunt's apartment, Callan claimed to have been drinking beer with Cortez Kelly when he began stabbing her. Delia, who was staying at the flat because it was close to the prestigious school she attended, was dozing off on the couch as his aunt slept in her room. He is now 31 years old. John Joseph de Blas, 8 years on death row. Heather Lee Keaton and her common-law husband John de Blas were convicted for the murder of their 2 children. Keaton was the stepmother to de Blas's biological son and daughter, Chase de Blas and Natalie de Blas, who were killed 3 months apart. De Blas is now 40 years old. Stephen Lindsay, 7 years on death row. A Gadsden man was found guilty of capital murder in the 2013 killing of his 20-month-old daughter by an Etowah County jury in less than 2 hours. Malia Tashay Lindsay was murdered in a ritual killing. She was killed by at least 6 blows to the neck delivered with a machete-like sword, according to medical testimony and horrific images shown to the jury. Close to the family's residence, detectives discovered her body in waste bags, and a few blocks away, they discovered numerous swords and long knives dumped in a forested area. When Lindsay was being arrested, he made a confession that was captured on camera and played to the jury later. He had pleaded not guilty due to a mental illness or defect. He is now 46 years old. Christopher Henderson, 2 years on death row. He was given the death penalty for murdering his wife, Kristen Smallwood Henderson, and their unborn baby, her mother, her other child, and even her nephew. At the time of the murders, Kristen Henderson was 35 years old, and she was 9 months pregnant with her kid. Her mother, Jean Smallwood, was 67 years old, and her nephew, Eli Sokolowski, was 1 year old. Her son, Clayton Daniel Chambers, was just 8 years old. Authorities came to find the bodies inside a burning home in New Market. Henderson is now 48 years old. Jimmy O'Neill Spencer, 4 months on death row. Martha Dell Reliford, 65 years old, Marie Kitchens Martin, 74 years old, and Colton Ryan Lee, just 7 years old, died in 2018, and Jimmy O'Neill Spencer was found guilty of 7 charges of capital murder. The 74-year-old Guntersville grandmother and her 7-year-old great-grandson were allegedly killed by Spencer during a heist that netted just $13 in cash. In a recorded confession, Spencer admitted to killing Reliford for roughly $600 and then killing the child to get rid of a witness. The homeless criminal, who had 8 convictions dating back to 1984, including assault, robbery, and escape, was a dangerous offender fresh out of prison at the time of the killings. He is now 58 years old. Patricia Blackman, 28 years on death row. Blackman was responsible for her adopted daughter's passing. Dominiqua Bryant had only just turned 2. On May 29, 1999, Patricia Blackman dialed 911 to ask for the dispatch of paramedics to come to her trailer in Dothan. Patricia Blackman informed the operator that her child was not breathing. Dominiqua was found unresponsive and laying on the floor of Patricia Blackman's mobile home at about 9:30 p.m. Eddie Smith, a paramedic in Dothan, testified. She was only wearing a diaper and blood-soaked socks. She had a hematoma on her forehead and blood all over her chest. The paramedics attempted to revive her before transporting her to the emergency room at Flowers Hospital. Blackman is now 54 years old. Tiara Capri Gobble, 17 years on death row. Gobble was held responsible for her 4-month-old baby Phoenix Cody Parrish's death. On December 15, 2004, Phoenix was transported to the emergency room of the Southeast Alabama Medical Center in Dothan. He was not breathing and had no pulse. The autopsy found that Phoenix had suffered a traumatic head injury and that his skull had been cracked. Phoenix also had multiple bruises on his face, head, neck, and chest, as well as shattered ribs, a broken right arm, fractures in both wrists, and the tear in the inside of his mouth that appeared to have been caused by a bottle being rammed into it. When his mother was unable to put him to sleep, she lost her cool, and then the baby passed away. She is now 40 years old. Christy Michelle Scott, 14 years on death row. According to court documents, Scott intentionally set her home on fire, killing her 6-year-old autistic son. The fatal fire was actually started in her children's bedroom, according to the findings of the fire investigators. It's possible that Scott was attempting to file a claim with the insurance company. In the early hours of August 16, 2008, the Scott home caught fire and Mason died as a result. Dr. Emily Ward, a pathologist with the Alabama Department of Forensic Sciences, claims that Mason died from thermal burns and smoke in his airway. Mason was asleep alone in the children's bedroom, while Christy and her 4-year-old son were asleep in the room of Jeremy Scott. He was the father of Mason. She is now 45 years old. Heather Lee Keaton, 8 years on death row. In 2010, Lee Keaton was accused of killing her 2 stepchildren, Natalie Blas, age 4, and Chase Blas, age 3. Along with her partner, John Blas, the children's father, she perpetrated these crimes. Natalie was strangled to death in March 2010 after being duct taped, placed in a suitcase, and kept in a closet for 12 hours. Afterwards, her body was dumped in a wild area not far from Citronelle. In June 2010, Chase was fastened to a broom handle and left in a bedroom corner overnight, where he died from suffocation. His body was found in the woods close to Van Cleve, Mississippi. The reason why he died was because he simply asked about where his sister was. Keaton is now 35 years old. See you next time. Bye-bye.